Three Appalachian families share the same impossible curse. Every firstborn dies at 27. Back in the early 1800s, when America was still figuring itself out, families started trickling into the Appalachian Mountains looking for something most of us take for granted today, a place to call home. These weren't your typical settlers with fancy wagons and detailed maps. Most came with nothing but grit, a few tools, and children trailing behind like ducklings. The mountains didn't exactly roll out a welcome mat. Winter temperatures could freeze your coffee before you finished drinking it. Summer heat made working the rocky soil feel like punishment. Bears wandered through backyards that weren't really backyards yet. But here's the thing about tough conditions. They either break people or forge them into something unbreakable. Most of these mountain families trace their roots back to Scotland and Ireland. Their ancestors knew a thing or two about clan loyalty and holding grudges. When your great-grandfather fought English lords over sheep pastures, family honor wasn't just talk, it was survival. That DNA didn't get diluted crossing the Atlantic. Families like the Hatfields settled on one side of the mountains, while the McCoys claimed territory on the other. Both clans multiplied like rabbits. We're talking families with 10, 12, sometimes 15 children. Makes sense, right? More hands meant more help clearing forests, planting crops, and defending what little you'd managed to scrape together. But here's where things get interesting. When you've got that many people sharing the same last name in a confined area, every family disagreement becomes neighborhood drama. Add limited resources, good farmland, clean water, hunting grounds, and you've got a recipe for tension that could simmer for decades. The Scots-Irish brought something else with them, an eye-for-an-eye mentality that made forgiving and forgetting nearly impossible. If someone wronged your family, you didn't just get mad, you remembered. Your kids remembered. Their kids remembered too. Land disputes were particularly nasty because property lines meant everything. Surveyors were rare, maps were sketchy, and proving ownership often came down to whose word carried more weight in the community. One family might work a piece of land for years, only to have another clan show up claiming their grandfather had rightful ownership. Then there were the everyday frustrations that mountain life served up regularly. Livestock wandered into neighbors' crops, water rights got murky during dry spells. Someone's hunting dogs might chase another family's animals, small problems, but when you're already struggling to survive, small problems feel enormous. These mountain clans developed their own codes of honor and justice. If the law couldn't reach you, and it often couldn't in remote hollows, you handled things yourself. Family reputation mattered more than individual success. Insult one member, and you'd insulted them all. What started as isolated families seeking better lives gradually transformed into something more complex. Close-knit became clannish. Self-reliant became suspicious of outsiders. Proud became stubborn. The very qualities that helped them survive would eventually fuel conflicts that made their family names infamous across America. But how does everyday mountain tension explode into legendary hatred that lasts generations? Well, sometimes it only takes one dead man and a stolen pig to light a fuse that burns for decades. Everything started falling apart after the Civil War ended in 1865. Asa McCoy, a Union soldier, came home to find his world turned upside down. The Hatfields had sided with the Confederates, while many McCoys fought for the Union. Bad blood was already brewing. Then Asa turned up dead. The McCoys pointed fingers straight at the Hatfields. Devil Anse Hatfield and his crew denied everything, but nobody believed them. Well, except for other Hatfields. Trust between these families cracked like ice on a frozen pond, but here's where things get really messy. The Tug Fork River separated Kentucky from West Virginia, and guess what? The McCoys lived on the Kentucky side while the Hatfields controlled West Virginia territory. Different states meant different laws, different sheriffs, different everything. Perfect recipe for chaos. Years passed with both sides eyeing each other like hawks. Then came the pig. A single hog wandered onto Hatfield land around 1878. Randolph McCoy claimed it belonged to him. Floyd Hatfield said it was his pig. Sounds ridiculous, right? But when you're dirt poor and that pig represents months of food, suddenly it matters. A lot. They dragged the whole mess to court. The judge, a Hatfield relative, the key witness, Bill Staton, who had Hatfield blood running through his veins. Shocker, Floyd Hatfield won the case. Randolph McCoy walked away empty-handed and furious. Bill Staton paid for his testimony with his life. Sam and Paris McCoy shot him dead. In 1880, The McCoys claimed self-defense, but the Hatfields weren't buying it. And the weird part is, things were about to get even more complicated. Enter John C. Hatfield, Devil Ance's charming son with a reputation for breaking hearts. At an election day gathering in 1880, he locked eyes with Rosanna McCoy across a crowd of drunk mountain folk. She was beautiful, he was dangerous, and both families would have rather seen them dead than together. But love makes people stupid. Rosanna ran off with John C., living in sin right under Devil Ance's roof. Can you imagine Christmas dinner at the Hatfield place? The McCoys felt humiliated, betrayed by their own blood. The romance fizzled out when John C. moved on to Rosanna's cousin, Nancy McCoy. Talk about adding insult to injury. Poor Rosanna was left pregnant, abandoned, and caught between two warring clans who both saw her as a traitor. Then came August 7, 1882. Election day in Pike County, Kentucky. The McCoys and Hatfields showed up to vote, drink, and probably settle some scores. Three McCoy brothers, Tolbert, Farmer, and Randolph Jr., got into a heated argument with Ellison Hatfield over that stupid pig case from years back. Knives came out. Ellison Hatfield, Devil Ance's brother, took multiple stab wounds and a gunshot. He was dying, and everyone knew it. Devil Ance and his boys kidnapped the three McCoy brothers before they could face trial. They waited for Ellison to die, then dragged those boys across state lines to West Virginia. What happened next would turn a family squabble into America's most legendary blood feud, where revenge became the only law that mattered. The Hatfields weren't about to let Ellison's murder slide. Devil Ance Hatfield had already lost his brother, and in the mountains, family blood demanded an answer. 3 days after Ellison died, the Hatfields made their move. They grabbed Tolbert, Farmer, and Randolph McCoy Jr., the three brothers who'd killed Ellison. But here's where things get really dark. Instead of turning them over to authorities, the Hatfields tied them to pawpaw trees and executed them by firing squad. Cold blood doesn't even begin to cover it. News of the triple execution spread through both valleys like wildfire. The McCoys had lost 3 sons in one night. Randolph McCoy, the family patriarch, was beside himself with rage and grief. His neighbors whispered that the old man aged 10 years and 10 days. Then the real chaos began. Both families started carrying guns everywhere, to church, to the store, even to bed. Children learned to recognize the sound of approaching horses and knew which cellar to hide in. Women kept loaded rifles by their kitchen windows while kneading bread. The Hatfields burned down Randolph McCoy's cabin on New Year's Day, 1888. His daughter Alifair was shot and killed trying to escape the flames. Another daughter, Calvina, took a bullet to the hip. Randolph's wife Sarah barely made it out alive. Her hair singed and dress torn to shreds. But wait, it gets messier. Local law enforcement was split right down the middle. Some sheriffs were related to Hatfields, others had McCoy connections. Trying to get justice was like asking a fox to guard the henhouse. The Kentucky governor got involved, then West Virginia's governor fired back. Politicians started using the feud to score points with voters. The whole mess eventually landed in the U.S. Supreme Court. Think about that for a second. 2 hillbilly families fighting over a pig and some hurt feelings managed to reach the highest court in America. The justices probably wondered what they'd gotten themselves into. Meanwhile, innocent people kept paying the price. Store owners refused to serve customers from the wrong family. Preachers struggled to hold church services when half the congregation wanted to shoot the other half. Kids couldn't play together if their last names were Hatfield or McCoy. Local newspapers started calling the area the land of the lawless. Reporters from big cities came looking for stories about wild mountain people who settled disputes with bullets instead of handshakes. Every shooting, every burned barn, every threatening letter made headlines across the country. The violence created a cycle nobody seemed able to break. Each attack demanded revenge. Each death required another death. Families who'd once borrowed sugar from each other now slept with one eye open, wondering if tonight would bring riders with torches. By the time the worst fighting ended in the early 1890s, at least 12 people were dead and dozens more had fled their homes. The Hatfields and McCoys weren't the only families destroying each other in America. Other clans were writing their own bloody chapters in different corners of the country. The Hatfields and McCoys grabbed all the headlines, but they weren't the only families turning mountains red with blood. Across America, other clans were busy proving that revenge never goes out of style. Take the Tewksbury-Graham feud in Arizona's Pleasant Valley. Pleasant Valley? What a joke of a name for a place that became a graveyard. These families started fighting over cattle in the 1880s. Sounds simple enough, right? Wrong. The Grahams accused the Tewksburys of cattle rustling. The Tewksburys fired back, claiming the Grahams were the real thieves. Soon bullets were flying faster than accusations. The weird part is how quickly neighbors picked sides. You were either Team Tewksbury or Team Graham. No middle ground allowed. For over 10 years, this feud turned Arizona's high country into a war zone. Men would ride out to check their cattle and never come home. Wives would send their husbands to town for supplies and spend weeks wondering if they'd become widows. Tom Graham became the last man standing from his family. Literally, his brothers, his cousins, even distant relatives, all dead. But revenge wasn't finished with him yet. In 1892, someone shot Tom right off his wagon. The Tewksbury-Graham feud had finally run out of Grahams to kill. Then there's the Brooks-McFarland mess in West Virginia. These families turned courthouse politics into blood sport. The McFarlands controlled local elections for years until the Brooks family decided they wanted a piece of that power. Campaign season became hunting season, and ballots weren't the only things getting counted. The feud exploded in 1889 when members of both families showed up armed at a political rally. Makes sense, right? Nothing says democracy like bringing your rifle to vote. The shootout that followed left several dead and the whole region terrified. People stopped going to town on election days. Some families packed up and left entirely rather than risk getting caught in the crossfire. But why did these feuds spread like wildfire? Simple, mountain communities were isolated, law enforcement was weak, and everyone knew everyone else's business. Add poverty, competition for resources, and enough moonshine to fuel bad decisions, and you've got a recipe for generational warfare. Each feud followed the same deadly pattern. One family would strike first, usually over something that seems ridiculous now: stolen livestock, disputed elections, or business deals gone wrong. The other family would retaliate, claiming self-defense or family honor. Then came the spiral: revenge for the revenge, blood for blood, until nobody could remember who started what or why. These mountain wars created legends that spread far beyond the hollers where they happened. Newspaper reporters from big cities would venture into feud territory like they were exploring darkest Africa. Their dramatic stories painted all mountain folk as trigger-happy savages living by some ancient code of vengeance. Most of these feuds eventually burned themselves out when enough men died or families moved away. But their stories lived on, becoming part of American folklore. The question is, what happened when Hollywood got hold of these tales and turned family tragedy into entertainment? Hollywood couldn't resist a good feud story. The Hatfields and McCoys became box office gold, spawning countless movies, TV shows, and documentaries that turned these mountain families into American legends. But here's the twist. Most of what people know about these feuds comes from Hollywood, not history books. The real story got buried under layers of dramatic shootouts and exaggerated hillbilly stereotypes. Kevin Costner's 2012 miniseries brought the feud back into living rooms across America. Suddenly everyone was an expert on mountain justice. The irony? Most actual descendants of these feuding families were watching from their suburban homes, probably laughing at how their great-great-grandfathers got turned into cartoon characters. Modern Hatfields and McCoys don't exactly live in fear of each other. They're more likely to bump into each other at Walmart than engage in midnight gunfights. Some families even became friends, bonding over their shared fame. The McCoy family reunion in 2000 actually invited Hatfield descendants. Makes sense, right? They had more in common with each other than anyone else could understand. Then there's the tourist angle. Towns along the Kentucky-West Virginia border discovered something magical. People will pay good money to visit authentic feud sites. Matewan, West Virginia turned its bloody history into a selling point. Gift shops sell Hatfield versus McCoy t-shirts right next to postcards of scenic mountain views. The local economy gets a boost from what once terrorized the community. But the real legacy runs deeper than Hollywood profits and tourist dollars. These feuds actually changed how America handles family violence. Legal experts studied the breakdown of law enforcement during the feuds. Why did local sheriffs fail so completely? How did family loyalty override basic civil order? The answers help shape modern conflict resolution and domestic violence laws. The cursed bloodline idea, though, complete nonsense. Genetics don't carry grudges. Violence isn't inherited like eye color or height. What actually got passed down were stories, attitudes, and sometimes poverty that made conflict more likely. The curse was cultural, not biological. Some families did struggle with the aftermath for generations. Property destruction during the feuds left some descendants starting from nothing. Others moved away entirely, abandoning land their families had worked for decades. The economic impact lasted long after the shooting stopped, and the weird part is how these stories shaped outsider perceptions of Appalachia for over a century. Mention you're from mountain country, and someone inevitably makes a joke about feuds or asks if you're related to the McCoys. The stereotype stuck harder than the actual history. Well, modern feuding families exist, but they're more likely fighting over inheritance or business partnerships than stolen pigs. Family lawyers replaced gunfighters. Courtrooms became the new battleground. The real curse wasn't in anyone's blood. It was in refusing to let old wounds heal. Some families learned that lesson. Others didn't. But the mountains remember every story, every grudge, and every grave that marked where revenge led. The feuds ended, but their echoes never quite fade away.